Does anybody remember Mac Davis, the country western singer? He had a TV show in high school, and possibly more than one, but one hit song. And that's how I remember him. The lyrics went something like this: "Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. I can't wait to look in the mirror because I get better looking each day. To know me is to love me. I must be a heck of a man. Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble, but I'm doing the best that I can." Have you ever known anybody like that? I mean, that's kind of an extreme case. I think there's most of us to want to be the center of attention, to want to be the expert on everything, to want to be the one who's always right, the leader, the one whose plan we're always going to follow. That can be a little difficult to live with for the rest of us sometimes. I know, I've known a few people like that over the years. I remember when I was in college, my best friend was a guy named John. He was very smart, well-read, and conversations with him were fun because sometimes there were things that he would know that I'd never heard of. And that was really cool. And sometimes there were things I knew that he hadn't heard of, and that was pretty cool as well. It wasn't like one of us had to be right and the other one had to be wrong. We learned from each other, and that was just kind of a fun part of the friendship. Those conversations could be very long and wide and deep, and we, like a number of people in their college years, figured we'd pretty much figured out all the problems of the world. John had a girlfriend. Her name was Sandy, and it was not as fun talking to her because you couldn't really tell her anything she knew about. In fact, if you told her something you thought she might not know about, she would correct you and tell you what was really the case, because she was an expert in everything. And if you doubted her or wanted to look up what she said and check it, she would just get angry because you were clearly not a good friend to do something like that. I remember once starting to come down with a cold, and she said, "Oh, well, what you need to do is go to the emergency room, get them to give you a shot of penicillin. That'll knock that cold right out." I said, "I don't think antibiotics work like that." And she said, "Well, I'm got a lot more experience in this than you do, and that's what you need to do." And so sometime later, when I went to the doctor for something else, I said, "Do you take antibiotics for a cold?" And the doctor said, "No, of course not." And I mentioned that to her, and she kind of rolled her eyes and said, "Well, these doctors, you know." We have a bit of that in our country right now. People who are experts, doctors, scientists, historians, are often called to task by people who heard the way it really is on the internet. And that can be kind of hard to take. And, you know, it may be for big things, or it may be for small, it may be for some things, or maybe for many things. I know that idea that I have to be right, I have to be in the center of things, can start very young, often does. Hopefully we grow out of it. But I remember my niece, who stayed with us for about 6 months when she was 9, and I remember sitting down and helping her with her homework because she was having trouble with multiplication of 3-digit numbers. And so she started doing it, and I said, "Well, no, you need to carry the 1 here." And she said, "No, you don't." And I said, "Well, yes, you do." "You don't know what you're talking about." So I was not able to help her with her homework because she felt she could not trust my opinion. Hers was better. Her name was also Sandy. I'm seeing a pattern. Although I've known many people who were not named Sandy who had strong opinions and would not be questioned or challenged on them. It's a difficult thing, and it's what Christian tradition calls the sin of pride. And it can be very unhelpful, put it that way. For little Sandy, man, she got a pretty bad score on her report card for math that time. Ultimately, she got better about listening to other people and became a fine woman. Big Sandy, well, she broke up with my friend and married someone else and started her own church. She figured she was the expert because she'd spent years hanging out in the self-help and New Age sections of the bookstore. And they had a noble idea, she and her husband. They were going to have a church where everyone was welcome and everyone was respected, whether you came from a Christian or a Buddhist or a Jewish or an atheist or a Wiccan or whatever kind of background. You would just come and bring your special knowledge and they would all blend it together. But there was, I noticed, when I was still seeing their newsletter, there was one piece of unwritten doctrine, which was Sandy is always right. You can bring your wisdom, but if it doesn't match up with what she believes, that kind of gets put to the side. I don't think anything ever too bad happened with her church that I know of. I don't think they bought a compound anywhere. But I think it can be kind of dangerous when someone who has a lot of charisma and expresses themselves with that kind of confidence picks up followers who are perfectly willing to accept that, yes, they are the most important person, and yes, they are always right. Or if they're wrong, it's seldom enough that it doesn't really matter. And yes, it's okay to hand over your right to have opinions and make decisions on your own to that person. That can be very, very dangerous. And that's whether it's a religious leader, a political leader, a leader of any kind. We need to beware of people who insist on being right, who insist on being the most important, which is, I think, what Jesus is kind of telling us in our story today. In the scripture, Jesus goes to the home of a Pharisee, and he sees that people are kind of jockeying to get the best seats at the table, so they can talk to the host, so they can be the guest of honor, so they can be seen. So everyone will know how important they are. And he tells them a parable, and he says, when you're invited to the wedding feast, isn't it better to wait and see? Just take an ordinary seat and wait and see where the host wants you to be. Because if you go and sit at the head table, you may be very embarrassed when he asks you to sit at the kids' table for Thanksgiving dinner. Don't worry about where you sit. Don't worry about your opinions always going unchallenged. Don't worry about being the most important. Don't give your pride too big a leash, because it can turn on you. Now, you can kind of get that story a little messed up too, because some people hear that and they think, oh, well, if I'm going to be humble, that means I'm nothing. I can't do anything right. I'm the lowest and worst person in the room. Have you ever known someone who did that? There's something called imposter syndrome. And I know about it because I do it sometimes. And that is when you get the conviction that people who think you're smart, good, special, they really don't know what they're talking about. You've got them fooled. You feel like you're an imposter doing something that you've got no business doing. Preaching a sermon and you've got no idea what you're talking about. But everybody is fooled, and so you're okay until they wake up someday, and then you're in trouble. I think probably for every person who is the egotist, who believes that they're the best and the most important and always right, there are probably 100 people who think too low of themselves. And honestly, that's not humility either. Humility isn't putting yourself down. In fact, I found this out years ago in the Episcopal Book of Common Prayer. It talks about the 7 deadly sins. And it says the sin of pride is the most dangerous. And the sin of pride, of course, is the person who's so full of themselves and puffed up and kind of lords it over everyone else. But the sin of pride is also the person who says, I'm the lowest and the worst, I ruin everything. Because they're both distorting what their place is in the world. None of us are really the best. None of us are really the worst. We're mostly somewhere in the middle. We might call that ordinary, although I think what Jesus would say is no. The middle is a very special place. Because the middle is the honest place. Humility is about honesty. It is about honestly expressing your ideas and opinions, honestly standing up for those things that you know to be right, but doing that with a sense of self-critique as well as critique of others. Humility is listening with respect. And that is, even if the other person seems completely wrong, seems completely off, seems ignorant or irrational, listen well enough that you can hear what they are really saying so that you can understand them. And understanding them, then you may honestly say, well, I don't think you're right. But it's amazing the difference it makes talking to people when you assume an attitude of respect. When you assume that not only can you be right, but they can be right too. Honesty, humility, is when you run across something and you don't know, instead of pushing your way through with an answer that you just made up, saying, I don't know. I need to find out about that. It's also saying, I was wrong. I thought you were wrong, but it turned out I was wrong, and I want you to know that. Humility is not assuming you're automatically right. It's not assuming that anyone else is automatically wrong. It's listening with an open heart and an open mind, and then doing your best to find the truth and follow it. You don't need to take the seat of honor, you find. Take any seat, because God will see you and will know you wherever you are. Don't make assumptions. You probably all know the old saying about assumptions, which I won't repeat. It is hard work to put aside our assumptions. It takes a lifetime to become more humble, more honest in that way. But it's worth the effort because, oh Lord, it's hard to be humble, but we're doing the best that we can.